dream destinations, exceptional cruises, polar adventures. Welcome to Beyond the Horizon, the podcast that takes you where the journey truly begins. A production of Area Voyages.
Usually when we talk about taking a vacation, there is this heavy expectation of absolute predictability.
Right. You want the well-oiled machine.
Exactly. You book the resort, you know exactly what time the breakfast buffet opens, you know the infinity pool is heated to precisely 82 degrees. And honestly, the most unexpected thing you ever really want to deal with is maybe a slight delay at the swim-up bar.
Yeah, minor inconvenience at best.
Right. Because the modern vacation is engineered to be safe, it's comfortable, and it is entirely scripted for you. But then, you step into the world of what travel has actually become in 2026. Specifically, when we look at the very edges of the map.
That's where the script completely falls apart.
It's totally thrown out the window. We are looking at a landscape of travel that is completely fractured from those old definitions. I mean, we aren't talking about floating casinos or massive floating cities with thousands of people and water slides. We are talking about reaching the absolute unforgiving edges of the Earth, the ice caps, the frozen frontiers, and how we get there it's changed overnight.
It really is a fundamental paradigm shift. We've essentially traded that manufactured predictability of the beach resort for the raw, untamed reality of the polar regions.
Yeah.
And what's so compelling about this specific moment in 2026 is that the barrier to entry for these extreme environments has fundamentally changed. We were seeing an absolute boom in a very specific, highly intense type of travel, and it's driven by technological leaps that simply didn't exist even a decade ago.
And that boom is exactly what we are decoding for you today. So our mission for this deep dive is to cut through the massive, honestly, sometimes overwhelming growth in the expedition cruise market. And we have our hands on a really incredible source to help us do this.
Yes, it's a fantastic document.
It's a comprehensive 2026 guide to expedition cruise lines put together by Yvon Jr. Blanchette. He's a travel advisor and cruise specialist over at Area Voyages, and he has laid out the entire ecosystem for us. The goal here is to help you figure out exactly what kind of polar explorer you actually are, because the options haven't just grown, they've exploded into wildly different philosophies.
And that is the crucial starting point for you as the listener. Choosing an expedition today is absolutely not about picking a ship based on, the layout of its dining room or the square footage of the spa.
Right, it's not a real estate choice.
Exactly. It is about choosing a philosophy of travel. It's about deciding how you want to physically and psychologically interact with the most fragile and extreme environments on our planet. Mm-hmm. Every single operator we are going to dissect today represents a fundamentally different approach to the wild.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because before we can even talk about the different philosophies of these companies, we have to tear down what most people naturally picture when they hear the word cruise. We need to do some serious unlearning here.
We do.
Because based on Blanchette's guide, the very definition of an expedition cruise is built almost entirely on what it is not. So let's start with the physical reality. What makes an expedition ship structurally different from those towering behemoths we see parked in Miami or the Caribbean?
Well, the differences are structural, operational, and psychological. Let's tackle the physical scale first. A conventional cruise ship is essentially a moving municipality.
A floating city.
Right. They carry anywhere from 3,000 to over 7,000 passengers. Expedition ships, by definition in this sector, carry anywhere from 50 to a maximum of 250 guests.
Wow, that is a massive drop-off.
It changes everything. That alone changes the entire social and operational dynamic. You aren't part of a moving city anymore. You are part of a highly focused, very small community.
And I want to focus on the hardware for a second, because the ships themselves are built completely differently.
Yeah.
The material we're looking at points out they have purpose-built or ice-strengthened hulls. They aren't just floating hotels. They are specialized tools designed to withstand immense pressure. I mean, we were talking about navigating through environments that would literally tear a hole in a standard cruise ship.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Standard cruise ships are built with relatively thin steel plating. It's optimized for calm, warm waters and maximum interior volume. Expedition vessels are engineered for survival and access.
Right.
They have reinforced steel belts around the waterline, highly specialized framing inside the hull to absorb the impact of striking sea ice, and completely different propulsion systems. And that physical access brings us to the operational difference.
Which is huge.
On a conventional cruise, the ship docks at a massive concrete pier in the Bahamas, a ramp comes down, and thousands of people walk off to buy duty-free watches. In expedition cruising, there are no piers.
You're just pulling up to a glacier?
You are dropping anchor in a pristine bay in Antarctica, or the high Arctic, and the only way ashore is via a fleet of Zodiacs.
Let's talk about those Zodiacs, because I think people picture a nice little tender boat with cushioned seats. But a Zodiac is essentially a heavy-duty, military-grade inflatable raft.
It is a flat-bottomed, rigid-hulled inflatable boat, usually powered by a heavy outboard motor. You are sitting on the rubber pontoons, completely exposed to the wind, the freezing sea spray, and the elements.
Definitely no cushioned seats there.
Not at all. And the shore programs you are taking these Zodiacs to are not led by local tour guides holding numbered lollipops. They are led by marine biologists, glaciologists, historians, and ornithologists.
So the focus is entirely different.
The primary focus of the entire operation is entirely outward. It is fixed on the wildlife, the penguin colonies, the polar bears, the calving glaciers.
Which means the onboard experience is totally inverted, right? You aren't going to find a Broadway-style musical or a sprawling casino on these vessels. The destination is the entertainment.
Exactly. The environment provides the spectacle.
And here's the part that I think requires the biggest psychological leap for anyone used to normal travel. The itinerary. Or, well, rather the total lack of one.
Yeah.
Because if I book a traditional cruise to the Mediterranean, I have a printed itinerary that says on Tuesday at 8 a.m. we are in Rome, and Wednesday at 2 p.m. we are in Naples. And if the ship misses that port, people demand refunds.
They riot at the guest services desk.
Exactly. But the source material makes it abundantly clear. On an expedition, there are no fixed itineraries. The day is completely dictated by the weather, the shifting sea ice, and where the wildlife happens to be.
Which is a profound adjustment for a modern traveler. We are heavily conditioned to demand absolute certainty when we spend thousands of dollars. We want a guarantee. But in this specific arena, the unpredictability is not a bug in the product. It is the defining feature of the product.
Right.
The expedition leader might wake you up over the PA system at 5:00 a.m. because a pod of killer whales is breaching off the bow. Or, conversely, a highly anticipated landing on a specific island might be suddenly canceled because the wind has shifted 5 degrees and the bay is suddenly choked with fast-moving pack ice that would trap the Zodiacs.
You just have to surrender total control of the environment.
You really do.
I love that framing, but let me play devil's advocate here for a second. It's like comparing a traditional cruise to a theme park ride on rails. You know, at every turn, every drop, it's engineered for safe, predictable thrills. And the expedition cruise is more like an unscripted documentary starring you.
That's a great way to put it.
But wait, if I'm paying, say, $20,000 for a ticket, isn't it frankly terrifying to have absolutely no fixed itinerary? What if the weather is terrible for 3 days straight? Do you just sit in your cabin staring at a bulkhead?
It's a highly valid fear, and it's exactly why the role of the expedition team is so critical to the value proposition here. The context replaces the itinerary.
How do you mean?
Well, when the weather outside is raging, when you have 50-knot winds and you physically cannot safely launch the Zodiacs, the focus shifts inward to the enrichment program. You have daily briefings, you have in-depth evening lectures from world-class experts. The expedition team's job is to make the environment understandable and fascinating, even when it is hostile. They provide the narrative. So you aren't just sitting in a storm feeling cheated. You are sitting in a lounge attending a masterclass on the meteorological forces creating that exact storm, taught by a climatologist who has studied the Drake Passage their entire life.
Oh, wow. That reframes it completely. The value isn't in a guaranteed schedule at all. The value is in the expertise that helps you interpret whatever nature throws at you. You're paying for the lens through which you view the chaos.
Exactly.
And just to ground this in geography for a second, the guide notes the primary regions for this type of travel are Antarctica, which operates during the southern hemisphere's summer, so roughly November through March, and the Arctic from May through September. But there are also year-round spots like the Galapagos, Alaska, Patagonia, and Greenland.
Those are the proving grounds for the industry.
But hold on, if unpredictability is the baseline for all of this, if the ice and the wind ultimately decide where the ship goes every single day, how do you actually choose a company? I mean, if I can't pick an itinerary, how do I decide who to give my money to?
This raises an important question, and it's where we need to introduce what we could call the explorer's matrix. Because the market has exploded by 2026, it has fragmented to serve entirely different traveler profiles.
Okay, so what are the metrics?
The guide lays out several key variables that you, the listener, need to weigh against your own personal desires. The most fundamental sliding scale is the balance between onboard luxury and the intensity of the expedition itself.
Right, so you have to look in the mirror and ask yourself, are you looking for extreme physical exertion or comfortable observation?
Yeah.
Because things like sea kayaking among icebergs, camping out on the Antarctic ice overnight, or doing strenuous snowshoeing hikes, those are absolutely not available on every ship.
No, they aren't.
Some people want to earn their views with burning mussels and freezing sea spray in their face. And some people want to watch the icebergs glide by while holding a warm croissant in a heated observation lounge.
And both are completely valid ways to travel. But you must know which one you are before you book. And that leads to the next variable in the matrix: the size and expertise of the expedition team itself. This is highly technical, but vital.
Because of the ratios.
Exactly. If you are on a ship with a high ratio of guides to guests, you are going to get off the ship much faster. You'll have more specialized small group interactions ashore. If the ratio is lower, you might spend more time waiting for your turn in the Zodiac.
Which brings up the access methods. Like, are you satisfied with those Zodiacs we talked about, bumping through the waves to a rocky beach? Or do you require a ship equipped with twin-engine helicopters to physically fly you over the ice shelf to places boats simply can't reach?
Yes, the toys matter. And then you have the solo travel aspect, which is a massive financial metric we will dive into deeply later. The single supplements, the extra fees solo travelers have to pay just to have their own room, they vary wildly between these operators. So luxury versus intensity, physical activity levels, team size, access methods, and solo policies.
When you lay out those metrics, it really highlights how different these companies must be from one another. Wait, if we pull back and look at this matrix, what is it actually telling us about the industry as a whole?
It highlights the tension at the core of the market. As we analyze these different profiles, we have to ask whether the modern traveler actually wants raw, unfiltered adventure, or if they just want a 5-star luxury hotel that simply happens to be parked next to a glacier. The operators have placed very expensive bets on different answers to that exact question.
Let's start exploring those bets. But before we look at the newcomers who are trying to thread the needle between submarines and suites, we have to look at the absolute pioneers who invented this entire space, the purists.
The ones who laid the groundwork.
Exactly. The guide highlights 2 names that carry immense historical pedigree here: Lindblad Expeditions and Quark Expeditions. Let's start with Lindblad. According to the source, this company goes all the way back to 1958. A man named Lars Erik Lindblad actually led the very first tourist expedition to Antarctica in 1966.
It is the absolute bedrock of the industry. Think about what navigating to Antarctica in 1966 actually meant. No GPS, no satellite weather imaging, no modern thermal gear. Lindblad established the template that everyone else followed.
Unbelievable to think about doing that in the 60s.
Truly. But what defines their philosophy today is their 2004 partnership with National Geographic. That alliance wasn't just a clever branding exercise to, slap a yellow border on a brochure. It fundamentally shaped the onboard experience. It brought world-class photographers, naturalists, and active scientists onto every single voyage.
So it's heavily focused on the intellectual side of the journey. The guide says their polar specialist ships, the National Geographic Endurance and the Resolution, carry 126 guests and are built to Polar Class 5 ice standards. Can we pause on that for a second? What does Polar Class 5 actually mean?
The Polar Class, or PC system, is an international standard that grades a ship's ability to navigate through ice. It ranges from PC1, which is a heavy icebreaker capable of year-round operation in all polar waters, down to PC7, which is for summer navigation in thin first-year ice. Okay, so a PC5 rating is incredibly robust for a passenger vessel. It means the Endurance and Resolution can operate year-round in medium first-year ice, which might include some older ice chunks. It gives the captain the confidence to push deeper into the ice pack earlier in the season than a standard vessel would ever dare.
That makes sense. And fascinatingly, they aren't just resting on their polar laurels. The source notes that in 2026, Lindblad is launching their first ever European river expedition season on the Rhine. Taking that scientific expeditionary mindset to a crowded European river is a wild pivot. But if we stick to the polar regions, Lindblad is categorized as the absolute best for science, education, and photography.
Right. And if we contrast the two pioneers, Lindblad represents the intellectual legacy of expedition travel. They are built for the traveler who wants the educational dimension to be the core reason they are there. They want to learn how to meter their camera in blinding snow from a Nat Geo photographer. Now, if we look at the other pioneer mentioned, Quark Expeditions.
Which was founded much later, right?
Yeah.
In 1991 out of Seattle.
Yes, but Quark represents the physical legacy of exploration. Their defining historical moment was taking the first commercial guests to the geographic North Pole in 1991. They have an unmatched record of absolute firsts in the polar regions. Where Lindblad focuses on the depth of the intellectual enrichment, Quark focuses intensely on extreme access and the range of physical adventure.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The guide points out Quark's flagship, the Ultramarine. This ship takes up to 199 guests, but its distinguishing feature is that it has two twin-engine helicopters operating from two separate helidecks. Two of them. I have to imagine the logistics of running a dual helicopter operation off a moving ship in the Antarctic are just mind-bending.
The aviation logistics alone are staggering. You are dealing with saltwater corrosion on the rotor blades, the need for highly specialized pilots trained to land in whiteout conditions, and the immense safety protocols of launching off a pitching deck. But that detail you mentioned about having the largest expedition team is actually the linchpin of their operation. It's not just a marketing statistic.
How so? Why does a huge team matter so much?
Think about the mechanics of moving people. The size of that expedition team dictates exactly how quickly you can get 199 people out of their cabins, suited up in heavy polar gear, down to the mudroom, into the Zodiacs, or loaded into those helicopters, and out into the environment.
Oh, because time is of the essence.
Exactly. When the weather window in Antarctica opens, it might only stay open for 2 hours before a low-pressure system rolls in. A massive expedition team means you don't miss that crucial weather window waiting in a crowded stairwell for your turn.
I love that contrast. To use an analogy, choosing Lindblad is like choosing to attend a floating Ivy League university. Your professors are literally National Geographic explorers, and you are there to observe, absorb, and learn deeply. Choosing Quark is like being dropped into a high-budget action movie, where the explicit goal is to conquer the terrain, get up in the air, get out on the ice, and maximize your adrenaline footprint.
That is a highly accurate synthesis of the two approaches, the intellectual pursuit versus the physical pursuit. Both are pure, unadulterated expedition experiences, but they cater to very different dominant impulses in the human psyche.
Now, while Quark uses their twin helicopters on the Ultramarine to fly above the ice to get you where you want to go, there's a French operator in the guide that decided to take a completely different, almost brutalist approach. They decided to just build a machine that drives straight through the ice.
Yes, they did.
And this completely moves our discussion from the historical pioneers to a realm of extreme modern engineering and, frankly, staggering luxury. Let's look at what I call the apex of access and excess, Ponant and scenic eclipse.
This is where the market in 2026 gets truly wild. We are moving entirely away from the traditional base camp feel of the purists and entering a space where cutting-edge maritime technology meets uncompromised opulence. Let's look at Ponant first. They are a French line founded in 1988. While they have a fleet of very elegant explorer-class yachts, the guide zeroes in on one specific groundbreaking vessel, Le Commandant Charcot.
The source describes Le Commandant Charcot as a hybrid luxury icebreaker with a PC2 polar class rating. And the guide emphasizes that this is the highest rating of any passenger ship currently operating on Earth. They take between 92 and 245 guests depending on the voyage. But let's go back to that rating system. We talked about PC5. What does a PC2 rating actually mean in the real world when you are standing on the deck?
What's fascinating here is the sheer physics of what that ship can do. Most expedition ships, even the very good PC-5 ones, are designed to navigate through relatively loose pack ice, carefully pushing smaller chunks aside to find a path of least resistance. A PC-2 rating means Le Commandant Charcot is capable of aggressive, sustained ice breaking.
So it's not looking for a path, it's literally making one.
Exactly. The physics of an icebreaker are incredible. The bow is shaped differently. The ship doesn't just slice into the ice like a knife. It literally drives its reinforced bow up onto the ice shelf and then uses the immense crushing weight of the ship itself to break the ice downward. It means the difference between reaching the edge of the Weddell Sea and looking at the frozen expanse from a mile away versus turning the ship directly into the solid ice, engaging massive electrical pod thrusters, and crunching your way deep into the interior, specifically to find the highly remote breeding colonies of emperor penguins.
It allows them to reach the actual geographic North Pole by sea. The guide mentions they do winter Arctic cruises north of the Arctic Circle for Northern Lights experiences. Things that other passenger ships literally cannot survive because the ocean is frozen solid. It's brute force wrapped in high-end French luxury. But if Ponant is about brute forcing through the ice, the other operator in this category, Scenic Eclipse, is about bringing every conceivable billionaire toy to the ice.
Scenic is an Australian company. They started in 1986 doing coach tours, amazingly, before moving to river cruises and then ocean. They carry 228 guests, though they strictly cap it at 200 in Antarctica to comply with local landing regulations. When they launched the Scenic Eclipse in 2019, they heavily marketed it as the world's first discovery yacht.
And the guide points out that is not just marketing spin. This ship has 10 different dining venues for just 200 people. It offers personal butler service for every single suite, and the kicker. It features 2 helicopters and a custom-built personal submarine. A submarine! Let me pause you right here. I have to ask you, at what point does taking a 6-person acrylic submarine down to look at the underside of an iceberg stop being a true expedition and just become a billionaire's playground? Does this extreme level of luxury, the butlers, the 10 restaurants, the subs, dilute the actual spirit of an expedition?
If we connect this to the broader evolution of travel, it forces us to completely redefine the expedition spirit for the 21st century. The historical purists might argue that yes, having a butler draw you a hot bath after you look at penguins softens the experience too much. It removes the required grit and sacrifice of exploration.
Right, it takes the edge off.
But the counter-argument, which completely defines the philosophy of these ultra-luxury operators, is that the harshness belongs strictly outside the hull.
The base camp philosophy.
Yeah, precisely. Some travelers desperately want to witness the most intense, unforgiving environments on the planet. They want to see the crushing ice, but they absolutely refuse to suffer while doing it. They demand super yacht level refinement on the inside of the glass and raw, lethal nature on the outside.
It's the ultimate juxtaposition. Sipping a vintage Bordeaux while a whiteout blizzard rages against the panoramic window. And frankly, if you have the budget, you simply don't have to choose between comfort and access anymore. The engineering of ships like Le Commandant Charcot and Scenic Eclipse has bridged that gap entirely. But hold on. Let's think about the reality of this. Sending personal submarines down into pristine waters, aggressively breaking through multi-year ice, flying twin helicopters over untouched glacial valleys. What is the environmental footprint of all this access? We are talking about the most fragile, highly vulnerable ecosystems left on Earth.
Which brings up a deeply crucial existential concern for the entire industry in 2026. How do you justify burning heavy fuel to look at melting ice?
Which perfectly leads into the next category in our breakdown. Because while some operators are in an arms race to offer the most extreme toys, others are making completely different headlines. Let's look at the operators prioritizing the planet, the conscience of the ice. The guide highlights 2 major players here, Aurora Expeditions and HX, which used to be known as Hurtigruten Expeditions. Let's start with Aurora, because they're doing some fascinating things.
Aurora Expeditions is an Australian company founded in 1991 by the legendary mountaineer Greg Mortimer. By 2026, they're celebrating 35 years in the business, and according to the guide, they operate one of the most values-driven, ethically conscious products in the entire sector. They cap their polar expeditions at a strict maximum of 130 guests.
Which immediately ensures a very intimate, low-impact physical footprint.
It does, but the technological and corporate milestones are what really separate them.
I want to dig into the physical ships first. The source mentions they have 3 distinct vessels. The Greg Mortimer, the Sylvia Earle, and their newest ship launched for this season, the Douglas Mawson, which actually made Time's World's Greatest Places list for 2026. All 3 of these ships feature something called the Ulstein XBOW hull design. The guide says this design cuts through swells rather than crashing over them. Can you explain the fluid dynamics of why that matters to a passenger who might be prone to getting seasick?
Absolutely. Think about the traditional bow of a ship. It's shaped essentially like a V that flares out widely at the top to deflect water. When a traditional bow hits a massive wave, it rises up the face of the wave and then slams violently down into the trough on the other side. That slamming causes massive shuddering throughout the vessel, extreme pitching, and severe passenger discomfort. This is especially brutal in a place like the Drake Passage between South America and Antarctica, which has some of the most violent, unpredictable seas on Earth.
So what does the XBOW do differently?
The Ulstein XBOW is inverted. It curves backward toward the ship instead of flaring out. To use an analogy, a traditional bow is like hitting a wall of water with a snow shovel. The XBOW is like pushing a needle through heavy fabric. Instead of riding up and over the wave, the XDOW pierces directly through the base of the wave.
So it absorbs the kinetic energy completely differently.
Yes, it parts the water rather than forcefully slamming into it. This drastically reduces the pitching motion of the ship. It makes for a significantly smoother, quieter passage, which obviously means less seasickness for the guests. But structurally and environmentally, it allows the ship to maintain its cruising speed in rough conditions while using significantly less fuel, because it isn't constantly fighting the ocean's resistance. It's a massive win for passenger comfort and a massive win for fuel efficiency.
And speaking of wins for the environment, the second major milestone for Aurora, mentioned in the guide, is that in 2024, they officially became a certified B Corporation. The guide notes they are one of the first in the entire expedition cruise sector to achieve this. Now, let's be real for a second. In an industry that is literally built on burning marine diesel to move thousands of tons of steel through the ocean, how big of a deal is that certification? Is it just greenwashing?
It is the opposite of greenwashing. It is a monumental standard to meet. B Corp certification isn't a marketing label you buy by planting a few trees and calling your operation green. It is a rigorous, legally binding commitment. To become a B Corp, a company must submit to an exhaustive audit of their entire operation across several pillars: governance, environmental impact, community engagement, their workers, and their customers.
So they have to open the books on everything.
Everything. It means Aurora had to open up their entire supply chain. Where do they buy their food? How do they treat their international crew? What are their exact emissions per passenger? How do they handle waste management in international waters? They have to prove to a third-party verification board that they are legally prioritizing sustainability and ethical practices alongside financial profit. For a cruise line to achieve that is staggeringly difficult.
That is deeply impressive. And there's one more thing about Aurora that I want to hone in on, because I think it is going to change the math for a lot of our listeners. The solo traveler. The guide explicitly states that from the 2026 season onward, Aurora has dedicated solo cabins with absolutely no single supplement. This is a massive disruption. For anyone who hasn't tried to book a solo trip on a cruise ship, the financial punishment is usually severe. Operators routinely charge solo travelers a 50 to 100% markup to occupy a cabin alone, simply because the operator is losing the secondary onboard revenue, the drinks, the excursions of that missing second person. Aurora dropping that penalty entirely is a game changer.
It really is. It is a highly deliberate economic choice that fundamentally changes the demographics of who can afford to be on that ship. It fosters a very specific, much more accessible kind of onboard community. Now, if we contrast Aurora's intimacy capping out at 130 guests with the other sustainability leader in the guide, we get a fascinating lesson in how scale affects the environment. The guide introduces HX.
HX, which was originally founded all the way back in 1893 in Norway as Hurtigruten. They recently rebranded to completely separate their global expedition arm from their traditional Norwegian coastal ferry operation. The guide lists their flagship vessels as the MS Fridtjof Nansen and the MS Roald Amundsen. And here is the major difference. They take up to 530 guests. That is a massive structural jump from Aurora's 130.
It is a completely different operational scale. The guide notes that this larger size brings a distinctly Scandinavian, highly science-forward approach. But the core innovation here, the reason they are grouped under sustainability, is their propulsion. These ships are among the most environmentally advanced vessels in the world because they feature hybrid battery-powered propulsion.
Let me get my head around this. They are essentially giant hybrid vehicles, like a Prius, but for the Arctic Ocean.
In principle, yes. The battery banks are massive, highly advanced thermal-regulated systems buried deep in the hull. Now, they cannot run the ship for days on end purely on batteries. The physics of moving a 500-passenger ship simply require too much energy. But the battery banks allow the ship to do something called peak shaving.
Peak shaving?
Yeah, when the ship needs a sudden burst of power, instead of firing up another diesel engine and burning more fuel, it draws from the batteries. This dramatically reduces overall fuel consumption and total emissions over the course of a voyage.
But the guide also says it allows for zero-emission operation in specific areas.
Yes, and that is the magic of the system. The ship can switch to pure battery power for limited periods. This allows it to move entirely silently and cleanly through a highly fragile ecosystem, say a narrow fjord in Svalbard, or near a sensitive whale feeding ground without running its main diesel engines at all.
I can't even imagine what that sensory experience must be like. To be standing on the deck of a massive ship, gliding through the pack ice in total silence. No deep engine rumble vibrating through your boots, no exhaust smell, just the acoustic reality of the environment. Hearing the crackle of the brash ice against the hull, or the breathing of a surfacing humpback whale.
It's transcendent.
And the guide notes they pair this technology with a deep institutional commitment to science. They have full onboard science centers and a citizen science program where guests actually contribute to real-time polar research during their voyage, taking water samples or logging cloud formations.
And this brings us back to the importance of their scale. HX proves an essential point for 2026. Sustainability doesn't only belong to tiny, hyper-exclusive ships that charge a fortune. By operating with up to 530 guests, they lose some of the granular intimacy of a small ship, yes, but they gain massive economies of scale. The guide specifically points out that this larger capacity allows them to offer significantly more competitive pricing. They are effectively democratizing access to the polar regions while utilizing some of the most advanced green technology in the maritime world.
So if HX proves that you can scale up the physical size of the ship while maintaining a strict environmental conscience, the guide introduces another operator that proves you can completely scale up the length and the focus of the itinerary itself. Let's look at the boundary pushers, the operators who are taking the basic expedition concept and stretching it into entirely new shapes. Viking Expeditions and Atlas Ocean Voyages.
Viking is a fascinating case study in brand evolution. Founded in 1997, they are an absolute titan in river cruising, and they completely disrupted premium ocean cruising. But they entered the expedition space very recently, launching the Viking Polaris and Viking Octantis in 2022.
They carry 378 guests, which the guide notes produces a much more mainstream, familiar cruise atmosphere alongside the expedition program. They're clearly catering to people who already know and love the Viking brand, the Nordic design, the specific restaurants, and want to take that exact comfort level to the ice. But what caught my eye immediately in the source material is the sheer length of what they are attempting to do. The guide highlights an 87-day Arctic to Antarctica voyage. 87 days, from Nuuk in Greenland all the way down the longitudinal curve of the globe to Ushuaia in Argentina. That is nearly 3 months. It is the longest expedition itinerary of any operator in the market. I mean, think about the logistics of keeping 378 guests fed, entertained, and sane for 87 days.
What's fascinating here is the psychological profile of the traveler Viking has identified. Viking looked at the market and realized there is a growing demographic of travelers, likely retirees, or remote workers who have the time, the vast resources, and the desire for true longitudinal exploration. To traverse from the top of the world to the bottom on a single continuous voyage is a throwback to the grand multi-year age of exploration.
Oh, the old explorers.
Right, but they are executing it with modern, unwavering comfort. Viking essentially created a hybrid product, a mainstream, highly comfortable cruise environment that is structurally and logistically capable of extreme long-haul expedition routes. The guide also mentions they pioneered expedition cruising in the North American Great Lakes, which is a genuinely unique itinerary that utilizes their specific ship design to navigate through the lock systems.
It's brilliant market positioning. They aren't trying to be the gritty purists. They are bringing their loyal, established audience to entirely new frontiers without making them sacrifice the Viking experience. Now, if Viking is pushing the boundaries of duration and geography, the other operator here, Atlas Ocean Voyages, is pushing the boundaries of what an expedition actually focuses on. Atlas was founded very recently, in 2019, out of Fort Lauderdale. They operate smaller ships like the World Navigator, the World Traveler, and the World Seeker, all coming in strictly under 200 guests.
And their operational and financial model is highly distinct. The guide notes they are fully all-inclusive. Excursions, premium beverages, gratuities, meals, it's all baked into the initial fare. This positions them very competitively within the luxury expedition segment, providing a seamless yacht-style product where you never have to sign a bill. But the real differentiator, the reason they are boundary pushers, is their programming.
Right. While almost everyone else in the guide is intensely focused on looking at penguins, dodging icebergs, and finding polar bears, Atlas is breaking the mold with what they call their Cultural Expeditions program. The source says this deliberately incorporates folkloric performances, local artisan encounters, and community-level cultural experiences into the shore program. Which is interesting because when we think of expeditions, we think of empty, desolate landscapes. We forget that people actually live in these regions.
It's a vital, long overdue distinction in the industry. In places like the high Arctic Greenland, Nunavut, Svalbard, there are ancient indigenous communities with deep, profound connections to the environment. Historically, cruise ships would just sail past them to look at a glacier. An expedition that completely ignores the human culture of the region is only telling half the story of the landscape. Atlas is designed for travelers who want the rugged expedition-style itineraries and the zodiac landings, but who deeply crave a more socially and culturally curious atmosphere.
But I want to push back on that, or at least ask the question, how do you do that without it feeling like voyeurism? Bringing 200 wealthy tourists into a tiny Inuit village in Greenland could be incredibly disruptive.
That is a tightrope they have to walk, and it comes down to execution and partnership. True cultural expeditions require the operators to coordinate directly with local community leaders, ensuring the economic benefits of the visit actually stay within the community, and that the encounters are educational rather than purely performative. When done right, it transforms the trip from a simple wildlife safari into a profound human connection.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've covered the entire spectrum. We have the purists who focus on science and adrenaline. We have the apex predators of luxury bringing personal submarines to the ice. We have the sustainability champions proving you can operate with a conscience using silent batteries and B Corp audits. And we have the boundary pushers offering 87-day voyages and vital cultural encounters. The matrix is full. You know what exists. But now we have to transition to the harsh reality of making it happen. We need to talk about the economics, the complex logistics, and the ultimate luxury trade-off you have to make.
It is time to look at the budget, because the financial spread in this industry in 2026 is vast. It is not monolithic. According to Blanchett's guide, the pricing varies wildly based on the operator, the age and capability of the ship, the specific cabin category, and the rarity of the itinerary.
Let's break down the actual numbers, the tiers the guide provides, because the sticker shock is real. At the entry level for Antarctic voyages, and we are talking about operators like HX with their large economies of scale, or Quark if you are willing to book a shared cabin fares, generally start around $8,000 to $10,000 US per person.
That is the absolute floor for this type of travel in 2026. The logistical cost of operating at the bottom of the world dictates that floor. Then you move into the mid-range. For a standard, highly comfortable luxury expedition on a newer ship, the fares typically run from $12,000 to $25,000 US per person. This is where a large portion of the market sits. It offers great onboard amenities and strong, experienced expedition teams.
But then we hit the premium products, and this is where the numbers get staggering. The guide explicitly names the scenic hits with his submarines and helicopters, or Ponant's Le Commandant Charcot aggressively breaking ice to reach the geographic North Pole. For those highly specialized extreme itineraries, fares can easily reach $40,000 to $80,000 US per person, or even more for top suites. Wait, $80,000 for a vacation. Let's break that down. For a 2-week trip, that is over $5,000 a day. What are you actually paying for?
You are paying for the supply chain of the extreme. You are paying for the astronomical cost of aviation fuel for helicopters in the high Arctic. You are paying the massive insurance premiums required to operate a personal submarine under the ice. You are paying for a nearly 1-to-1 ratio of highly trained crew to guests. And you are paying for the bespoke culinary logistics of flying fresh, Michelin-quality produce to the absolute ends of the earth. The engineering required to keep you safe and pampered in a lethal environment is incredibly expensive.
And beyond the money, there is the timeline. You can't just wake up on a Tuesday and decide to book these trips for next month.
No, the logistics require immense foresight from the traveler. The standard booking window for popular Antarctic itineraries is 12 to 18 months in advance. And if you are looking at the truly rare trips, the guide specifically mentions the Emperor Penguin quest deep in the Weddell Sea or voyages to the actual geographic North Pole. Those can sell out completely 2 years or more ahead of time.
So if you are listening to this right now and thinking you want to stand at the North Pole, you are already planning for 2028. But there is a massive financial strategy to that patience. The guide notes that early booking discounts of 15 to 35% are common across almost most operators. If you are looking at a $20,000 ticket, capturing a 30% discount for booking 2 years out saves you $6,000. That is substantial. The industry rewards you for giving them capital early to secure their highly complex operations.
It is the single best way to manage the extreme costs of this sector, and there is one final piece of the market matrix that the guide addresses, which adds another layer of complexity for the buyer. It's the role of traditional ultra-luxury ocean cruise lines that have recently built dedicated expedition ships to capture this market. We're talking about legendary luxury brands like Quark Expeditions, which runs the Seabourn Venture and Seabourn Pursuit, and Seabourn itself, operating 2 purpose-built Polar Class 6 expedition ships.
Right, so you have pure expedition companies trying to add luxury, and you have pure luxury companies trying to add expeditions. The guide says these ocean line ships offer a genuinely higher standard of onboard luxury than even some of the pure expedition operators. You get the white glove butler service, the massive all-suite accommodations, the unbelievable fine dining is an absolute baseline, because that is their corporate DNA. But here is the ultimate trade-off that the expert guide lays out. The pure expedition specialists like Quark and Aurora tend to have much larger, much more specialized expedition teams. They have a deeper, historically ingrained culture of getting guests off the ship in challenging conditions. The luxury lines, on the other hand, offer an arguably better base camp, but often a slightly less intensive, less aggressive shore program.
It is the final, most defining question the traveler must answer for themselves. When the wind is howling at 40 knots and the sleet is falling sideways, do you want to be on a ship where the prevailing culture is, suit up, we're going out into the storm right now to see the ice formations, or do you want to be on a ship where the culture is, the weather is frightful outside, let's order vintage champagne to the suite and watch the storm from the heated balcony? Neither approach is inherently wrong, but you must know what you are buying before you write the check.
Exactly. I mean, you have to know your own limits. So let's do a rapid-fire recap of the ultimate matchups we've pulled from synthesizing all of this source material. If your priority is maximum physical adventure, if you want to be flying in a helicopter and rushing out onto the ice, your match is Quark Expeditions. If your priority is intimacy, removing the solo supplement penalty, and supporting a B Corp certified sustainable business with that XPOW design, your match is Aurora.
If you demand the absolute deepest educational and scientific enrichment program, and you want to learn from the best photographers in the world, you go with Lindblad and National Geographic.
If you want to aggressively break through multi-year ice to reach the literal North Pole while enjoying uncompromising French luxury, you need Ponant. And if you want the ultimate toys, submarines, helicopters, and butlers in the most extreme environments imaginable, you book the Scenic Eclipse.
It is a remarkably diverse, technologically staggering ecosystem for 2026. But looking at all of this source material, looking at the immense capabilities of these ships and the sheer amount of money flowing into the sector, I want to leave you with a larger, somewhat provocative philosophical question to mull over.
Let's hear it.
The source material shows us that by 2026, technology, the personal submarines, the twin-engine helicopters, the PC-2 hybrid icebreakers, has effectively removed all of the traditional physical barriers to the Earth's most extreme environments. If anyone with $80,000 and 2 weeks of vacation time can safely reach the geographic North Pole while sleeping in a luxury suite and eating Michelin-level food, what does the word expedition actually mean for the future of human exploration? Are we preserving these remote frontiers by bearing witness to them, or are we simply domesticating the wild?
Wow, that is the question, isn't it? Have we conquered the wild so completely with our engineering that we've turned the very edges of the map into just another luxury destination? Has the unknown become just another amenity? That is something you're going to have to decide for yourself when you look out over the bow of whichever ship you ultimately choose. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the 2026 expedition landscape. We started by talking about how the old idea of a predictable, heavily scripted cruise has completely fractured. And as we've seen today, what is rushed in to fill that fracture is wilder, more complex, and vastly more spectacular than ever before. It's time to figure out exactly what kind of explorer you want to be.
You've been listening to Beyond the Horizon, the podcast by Area Voyages. The full article for this episode is available at www.areavoyages.com. Remember to like, share the podcast, and leave a review to help promote our work. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss anything. Until next time, safe travels.